मसाले तो बहुत हैं, पर प्रकृति की गोद से खास चुने मसाले जिनकी ताजगी, खुशबू और स्वाद रहे बरकरार, ऐसे उम्दा मसाले बनाते हैं सिर्फ कैच। कैच का कोई मैच नहीं, 100%।
Our panelist for today's last session is Nikita Singh, renowned author of 12 books. In her latest collection of short fiction titled What Do You See When You Look in the Mirror, Nikita explores the secret inner lives of her characters as they grapple with love, loss, grief, and mental health. Asking her some profound questions is author and academian Harshali Singh.
Good evening, everybody. I welcome you today to the session Reflections and Romance with the very talented and celebrated author, Nikita Singh, at the Times Lit Fest 2021. Romance novels have always given value to women's innermost desires because, frankly, women have very rich inner lives. Now, I usually read romance novels for their happy endings, especially the stories which are fun, witty, and with mature love, with courtships and which have family strife. A lot of books portray women in a way that serves the male character's journey. So romance for me is full of women's voices and women's stories. Of course, there are male and non-binary authors now, and romance is no longer about a man and a woman. So there is more love to go around. And romance authorship may be the arena least dominated by straight men in the entire world. But that's just my take. Nikita, what about the romance genre appeals to you?
I think I've always liked to read about relationships that people have with others, and of course, like with themselves, with their environment, their society, and all of those things. So romance is just a part of that. It is the love that you feel towards somebody else, and how you show that.
Yeah.
And so when you read romance novels, I don't know how to put it in words, which doesn't bode well for me as a writer. But yeah, when you read romance novels, you can escape reality. You can escape. It's a little piece of emotional journey that you can just experience with yourself. And I think that people, when they read books, they want to read about themselves and they want to see their reflection in the words. And even if the story has nothing to do with them and it's not about their lives, it's the emotions that the book invokes in you that is what people crave. So when I read romance novels, I want to feel emotions and I want to go through this journey. And I've always loved them. I've always, ever since, I think the first romance novel I read was probably when I was 16 or 17. And ever since then, it's always been a pleasure.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say guilty pleasure because I'm trying to get rid of that word, because why should I feel guilty about something that makes me happy? But it's always been a pleasure.
Yeah, and then I feel that, books don't really need to be sad or challenging to be worthwhile. So when I read a romance, I usually do it to replenish my stores of good feelings and to remind myself that stories can end happily, and that people can fall in love and overcome their individual differences and find a way to be together. So I remember, as you were just talking about your first book, I remember the first book I read was, Love Story by Eric Segal, which really left an impact on my mind. And that was the benchmark that kind of set within me, wherein I realized that romance novels can be funny and yet can be tragic. And so when I do my own writing, it's like, and that's the expression that comes out. Which authors have influenced your narrative?
I think I've always kind of absorbed a lot of things from a lot of different authors. I don't think that my romance writing has been influenced by a romance writer. I think
Yeah.
it's just um, because you when you first start writing, all the framework that you have is from all the books that you've read. And I
Yeah.
read a lot of romance novels and I was reading them a lot. So then organically that sort of like was my first book, and then one thing led to another, and then step by step there were a few more love stories. And then um, as I gained more life experience, the stories kind of changed and had more elements to it, more dimension to my characters and the plots and all of that.
Mm.
Um, I think the writers that I love to read are the ones that, again, like capture what's going on inside someone's head really well, not just what it
Mm.
appears to the to others who might witness them. So um, right now, I have been reading a lot of Neil Gaiman, and he doesn't write about romance, but he writes about relationships that people
Yes.
have. Because
Yes.
at the end of the day, I feel like all fiction novels are about relationship with self,
Yeah.
with others, with the environment that you're in.
Uh,
So Neil Gaiman, I was obsessed with all through 2020, like all through COVID times. I was
mm.
just one after the other reading all of his books. Um, and then I've always liked Thomas Bernhard and James Baldwin. And right now, I just bought 3 more books last night, and then just randomly at a grocery store at a Target, I saw it and I got it. But it's like those are thrillers. I bought early, and Moriarty has a new book, and Lisa Joel has a new book, and I didn't
Yeah.
know that they were coming out with new books, so I just picked those up. So I am open to being influenced by anyone. So
Anyone.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I get that. I completely feel you there. So when you do write your own books, do you take your own experience as the starting point when you're writing, when you start writing?
Not usually, no, because all of my books so far, apart from this most recent one, have been completely fictional.
Mm.
And I think sometimes I just observe things, and they don't even have to be things that have happened. Sometimes something else happens, and I kind of build on it, and
Yeah.
something happens to somebody else, or in a movie, or maybe a song makes me feel a certain way. And then I
Mm.
want to evoke that emotion with a fabricated set of circumstances that it's all imagination from then
Yeah.
on. So
So,
it's in pursuit of invoking that emotion.
right. So it's basically questions or any thought or observation that whatever you've absorbed from your environment that kind of finds its way into your writing.
Yeah. So for The Reason Is You, was one of my most recent books, and in that, just the one liner, just the one thought that I had was, what if what is it like for somebody to be in love with or be in a relationship with someone who's going through depression because of loss, and they're grieving.
Read.
and and then I took it one step further, and I was like, but what if they're not like in love, they just were on a first date, and then they get the news that her father has passed, and then he was there, so they formed this close bond. And now they're 6 months later, a year later, they're still in a relationship, but they didn't even really like each other. They were in the middle of a date, and it would have gone so differently. They might never have seen each other. So, and then I was testing the boundaries of a traditional monogamous relationship as to how his ex comes back into his life, and then questioning what matters more, like loyalty in the traditional term, or if that person who came back into his life is going to be the person that he spends the rest of his life with.
Like it.
Isn't it better to end this now than to keep this going? And then so it was all of these different questions, so like complicated layers that form, but it starts with one idea, and then you kind of build on that.
Yeah. Wonderful. So, as a reader, I mean, you said you read everything, and there's no particular genre that you kind of limit yourself to. But this question, in fact, really, it's a very interesting question to me. I don't know how you'll take it, but when you're about to write your books, do you read a lot of romance, and what do you think is like the secret portion of a good, enjoyable romance? Do you have like a formula that you follow, or something in your mind that you've already, a framework that you've set up for yourself,
I
something
think
like
when I
that?
start writing, I don't do much in terms of research, because I think it comes from this insecurity, or I don't know what the term would be for that, but I feel like I'm very good at copying somebody's voice. So I
Okay.
want to stay away from romance as much as I can, because I feel
Yeah.
like then I'll write their story instead of
Yeah.
my own.
Yeah.
Because if I'm reading something, that's how my voice will become in my writing very
And,
easily. So
and it
I
kind of
don't.
inevitably seeps into your own writing.
Right.
Yeah.
Their vocabulary, the way that they form dialogues, and the
Yeah.
way they've broken down their chapters, all of those things just assimilate. And then
Yeah.
I don't want that. So I actually try to stay away from books that are
Mm.
similar to mine, or similar to the one I'm writing.
Mm.
Um, but I do read a lot, because I think it's important to just have words, just be reading words, because you're going to be sitting in front of an empty word document, and you have to put words on that, so it feels really daunting when you feel like
Yeah.
there are no words. So when you're
Mm.
reading something that's completely not about what you're writing, that can be really helpful. So that's kind of what's worked for me so far.
Yeah. So I'm going to, kind of hit it off from what you just said. Have you
Mhm.
ever felt those dreaded two words of writer's block?
Yeah, oh, for sure. Before
Okay.
this book, I hadn't written anything for 2 years. But
Okay.
my writer's block looks a little bit different, because once I start writing something, I
Mm.
will finish it. But it's the sitting down to write that takes me forever. I will, I will not, because I'll make it such a mountain in my head, and then I would think that, okay, I need all the stars to align. I think I need everything to be falling in place. I need to have time. I need to not have an important project going on at work. I don't need, I need to be alone. I don't want anybody else here. And like that, finding that chunk of time. And then once you have that, then you're like, what now you have to write, but then you can't just like summon creativity.
Yeah.
You can't schedule it, so then it just leads to me thinking that maybe I can't do it anymore, maybe I'm not a writer anymore or something. It's and then looking at the stack of the books that I've written before, I think that it feels like a fever dream. Like I don't remember doing it.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. But once I start writing, I think that's another reason why my writer's block can be so intense before I sit down, is
Mm.
because once I start writing, I write so fast. I will always finish my book within 2 or 3 weeks. Just my
Mm.
first draft will be out on paper, just the whole thing.
Mm.
So there is no time for writer's block once I'm in the flow. But to get
Yeah.
there is so hard.
Just sit on that table.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I was thinking the other day, that in within the last 20 years or so, there has been a steady shift towards novels that are more accurately reflect the diversity of our readership now.
Mhm.
And readers are now demanding more representation and inclusivity within their romance novels, or any kind of writing work for in general. And many authors like you have taken up that calling. But do you think, in your view, has the expression of romance only, because we're in that session, has changed over the centuries for you? I mean, since you've read, you read a lot. So have you seen there a shift of writing in romance over the centuries?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was, I mean, of course, all books are the product of their um, environment, circumstances,
Yeah,
atmosphere,
yeah.
whatever's going on around them in the world. So that's been the obvious shift. But I do
Mhm.
feel that in terms of the content inside the book, um, I think it used to be a little more dramatic and a little
Yeah,
more romantic in that
yeah,
way.
yeah.
Uh, Now there's more of a realistic element to it,
Really.
because there was a time, maybe 10, 15 years ago, all the movies were saying, oh, this is not a romance novel, this is not a love story, like all that stuff, because it got a bad rep because nobody could relate to that. There was such a um, gap between those things, what you see on TV in a movie, or in what you read in a romance novel versus what was going on in the world, because nobody's living that single-minded, this is what I want and this is all I want kind of life, like all or nothing, do or die, like the whole thing. And so now there's more of those. So we're writing about complex characters who have more than one desire. They want things for themselves, they want things for their career, their family, their society, like all of those things. So we see more of a level-headed kind of approach to
More
it.
practical, yes. More
Right,
practical and realistic, yeah.
right.
So I'm going to come to your new book now, and your new book. What do you see when you look in the mirror? Is a collection of 15 short stories, and the thread that ties them all together is basically unmasking one's innermost emotion. And the characters in all the stories are in fact embracing their feelings, or they're confronting them. Essentially owning those feelings that they have, or the emotions that you wanted to evoke in that story. So what was your inspiration behind this book, and why did you feel the need to write it?
When I it was such a, people always think that novels happen, like you sit down and you plan it and then it happens. It's such a process, and it's so erratic the way it happens, because the first story, Together Forever, was a story that I thought of years ago. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I thought that maybe a young couple decides that uh, they're going to die together when it's time for one of them. And then what if when it's time one of them isn't ready? And what happens then? And then I started thinking about, what if the person who's dying, who has whatever illness, is thinking back to their life 30 years together or however long, and thinking about it in a certain light, and then once they pass, maybe the other person is thinking about the same events from their perspective. So right. So that's what I was thinking. And that's where the idea of inner lives came, about how, like, you can live the same life. And we always talk about how people who grow up in the same household, siblings, can end up so different from each other, even though they have the same nurturing that they got. So their nature changes. So anyway, so that was the initial thought for that story. And then I started thinking about more stories, like, um, I think one of the first ones was also the watering can, where this kid has to foster two plants and keep them alive for a month. That came from my cousin. So it was so fun too, because I have cousins who are 4 and 10, and I love their relationship. And then the way they talk, the way they think is so different from anything that I would think. So slowly I started putting these stories together, and then I found that the common theme was, you can never tell what's going on in someone else's head. um, so it became about inner lives, it became about mental health and your relationship itself, and what do you see at the end of the day when you peel off all the layers, and it's just you in the mirror, like, who is that person, how much of it that person is you. So those ideas, and then I thought about more plot points, and then it developed sort of that way. And it was such a fun book to write. It was difficult. I cried a lot. So many stories, I just sit there and cry, and then I was like, okay, now that I've had a good cry, let me let me go back. It's so
that's what I wanted to ask you. Was it like a cathartic book, or was it like the stories are collected over time, as you're saying that they were? And
yeah, some of them are definitely even stories that I wrote earlier. Maybe in my grad school, I wrote a couple stories that are in here, and I kind of left them untouched because I wanted the stories to all have their own voice, because they're about different people from different perspectives. So I wanted that to come through, and I honestly had so much fun writing this book, because um, it just felt like such an experiment, and I felt so free. Not because when you're writing a novel, you have an intention in mind and you have an ending in mind, and you want everything that the character says or does to be aligned with who they are and how they would react to a circumstance. But
Yeah.
with this, because you don't have to provide a 360 view of anybody, because it's short stories, it's very short. You don't. That's a difference between novels and short stories. With a novel, you have to know your character fully, and you have to know how they would react to something. Oh, that's not what they would say. What would they say? Like that kind of stuff. But with a short story, you just have to zoom into a scene and then zoom out, and that's
Yeah.
it. So you can write anything and not have to follow through. So you can make really erratic characters, and you don't have to do it for a long time. So you can
Yeah.
keep that up. So
Yeah.
that was so fun for me. And it was difficult because a lot of these stories come from personal experiences, things that I've seen, things that have happened to me, and all of these things. So it was hard, it was fun, it was a whole thing.
No, in fact, Together Forever actually gave me goosebumps, and Made for Each Other was such a real story. And you're very right, because while I was reading through the stories, I really felt that, that is where the question came from, that did you collect these stories over time? Because there is such an innocence to a few stories, and then there is a complete maturity in another one, and then you are like, okay, what happened here? So that was such a wonderful thing to do, to not touch the stories that probably you wrote at a very young age, and then leave them as it is. But is there a
Actually,
story or a sorry?
the story that you brought up, Made for
Yeah.
Each Other, and
Yeah.
then the next one, How Would They Know? They're
Yeah.
connected.
Yeah.
And that story is Made for Each Other is my agent's favorite story, and he wanted that to be the first story. And I was afraid because I thought that people always assume that the first story or like your novel is about you. And I thought
Oh,
that people would think I'm so vapid and so shallow. I only care about myself. So,
no.
but then that's the beauty of a collection, because
Yeah.
you can go into this person's mind and write whatever you want, and not
Yeah.
have people think that that's you because you have 15 other stories. I can't be all of them.
Yeah.
So it was so interesting to write this person who's just only thinking about herself and what she can get from this relationship and all that stuff. So
Yeah,
much fun.
no, what you said is very true, because in my second book, Anatomy of Choice, I write about a threesome. So when
Mhm.
I was, kind of on a book tour, I had people come up and ask me that, is this coming from personal experience? I said, no, everybody doesn't have, everything doesn't have to come from personal experience. You can
Right.
actually just question something and then want to, kind of figure out how that would work in the scenario that you live in.
Yeah,
But
it's
is
called
there a
imagination.
sorry?
It's called imagination.
Yeah,
Universe.
yeah. That's what I said. I said every serial killer, person who's writing a serial killer is not one in themselves, right? So
Right.
why question, people who write romance or erotica or things like that?
Right.
But the question that I wanted to get to was that, is there a story or a character in the book that is like your favorite? I know, all the stories, they're all our babies, and we love them all equally. But there's always one, as you said. Is there
Yeah.
one character or a story that you really find, that you were really satisfied with and completely
Mhm.
loved?
I think Together Forever ended up being, I put that first also because I had had that in my mind longest. And it
Hmm.
was very difficult to figure out how to end that. And I
Hmm.
went in thinking that the story was going to end a certain way.
Yeah.
But by the time I arrived at that ending, I was just feeling so bad for that character, Sher, that I couldn't do it. I had to change the ending. Um, then The Watering Can is about my cousins, and those are my
Yeah.
favorite characters.
Yeah.
But then there's Talking to Strangers that I really like. Good for Nothing is really close to me. Guru is a letter that I've written to my teacher. So I don't think that there's like one character that I can narrow down, but I do have my favorites in
Okay.
terms of what stories that I like.
All right. So coming to the kind of love that we are hearing about more and more often nowadays,
Mhm.
do you think, is it like, are you likely to find sustainable love or a relationship which will last over Tinder or uh, online and similar apps like that?
I think that the dating apps are just there to facilitate two people meeting.
Yeah.
And it can be really frustrating, especially right now with COVID and even before that, when you have this like structured life, you go to
Mm.
work, there's a certain set of people that you work with, and then you come home and then or go somewhere. Maybe like I don't know how active everyone's social life is, but nobody is meeting as many people as they were in college
Mm.
or in
Mm.
school because you go out and you have hundreds of people around you. So it's not the same when you're working with the same group of people all the time. So I think the dating apps are just a way to facilitate you meeting somebody new. And when somebody is ready to find a partner, it can be very frustrating to organically try to meet someone and
Yeah.
you narrow down your pool to the neighborhood or whatever that might be. um, so I think that it's a great way to meet people because I think more than ever, even with all the social media and probably because of that, people are so disconnected from each other, and
Yeah.
people feel isolated. And if you're ready for something and you feel like it's time, then
Mm.
it's great to have a platform to actually do something about it rather than just sit there and wait because that
We're all
you know,
looking for companionship. Yeah.
right.
And something's always, something might just work out. I mean, we all know of people who found their ever afters on
Mhm.
these dating apps. So why not?
Yeah.
So the a couple of years back, I was in a conversation with someone, and they said that that romance is very regressive, and it's all about sex. And so, where's the empowerment? Were there any challenges that you faced when you started writing, and do you face these problems even now after having written so extensively, or has that changed?
I'm curious how you respond to those people when they say those things.
I smile.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of the times the opinions like that come from
Mm.
people who don't even read
Yeah.
romance or haven't even read. So a lot of people will walk up to me and say, "Oh, why don't you write whatever other genre?" And I say that there are thousands and millions of books written in that genre. So why don't you just read that? You can't change somebody else's life to fit your idea of what I should be doing, you know? So as far as romance goes, honestly, I just can't understand why people can't just let others do what they want to do with their lives. I would never walk up to a computer scientist and tell them to not work in computers and work in electricity now or whatever. So, people just think that it's their right. So,
Mm.
so one, I had a problem. I have a problem with people telling others what to do.
Mm.
And two, as far as like romance being regressive, I don't think that that's true because
Yeah.
I mean, of course, it's subjective. It depends on what's been written in that particular book. But I think when you talk about sex, it's also a tool of empowerment for a lot of
Exactly.
people because we
Exactly.
are so oppressed as a society um, when it comes to even talking about sex. So there's that. Um, Also, when it's a woman or writing the novel, the fact is this a novel is a proof that this person has a voice and agency and authority over this. So like that in itself is the opposite of regression. So yeah, it's just you could argue about this stuff
All the time.
all day long, but at the same time, I don't need to justify my choices to other people because I don't expect them to justify their choices to me either. um it's very
Absolutely. I mean, that is one of the reasons I don't get into any
you
conversations with
just
people
smile.
like this, because frankly, I feel romance is the last place that reduces women. In fact, I feel romance kind of it shows how women come into themselves more fully. I mean,
Mhm.
she is discovering strength and independence and vulnerability and bravery and honesty and fighting a war, or to be proud of who she is as an individual. Where else would you find that?
Yeah.
And so that has to be celebrated, and somehow people are just not able to, probably get that.
For a
So,
lot of people, also being vulnerable means weakness,
yeah,
because it's tough to hide all your emotions. But it's right, again, like I don't need to talk to those people. We clearly have different views, so we can just agree to disagree. You can think a
yeah,
certain thing, and I can think something else, and that's fine.
absolutely. So, what would be the three things that you would tell a young writer who has just begun this journey, or somebody who aspires to publish their work? Would there be any three or four things that you kind of, because you've written so much and you have a
Mhm.
huge body of work, and you've obviously experienced, you've gone through all the hiccups that one goes through. Would there be like two or three things that you'd like to, kind of help them with?
I was in another panel just yesterday.
Mm.
We were talking about the same thing, and then she was asking me what I would say to people who worry about money and how can they make this a career, is it viable, and all of that. And all I could think was a young person thinking about writing, and they claim that, oh, I love this so much, I want to be a writer, but then they want to already know that it's going to be a lucrative career
Yeah,
and a profession, a lifetime profession.
yeah,
And that just feels like such an unnecessary weight to put on your own shoulders. Because if you so enjoy writing, then sit down and write. Why are you saying, why are you asking yourself, and why are you um, saying all
weighing the
these things
options.
to yourself that are making you feel diminished, and they're making you feel like you have this mountain to climb? Why are you thinking about a profession of like 20 years or 30 years or whatever, however long? Why don't you, if you love writing so much, why don't you sit down and write whatever you want to write? And then the second thing would be to, what do you want to write? A lot of times the people want to become a writer, but I think you should write when you have a story to tell, not
Mm.
just you can't just write a book for the sake of writing a book,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it won't feel, you won't feel it, so others won't feel what the heart in that book. um, and third would be sort of just to read a lot, and maybe not restrict yourself to reading a certain genre, or reading a certain kind of book that you think that your book is similar to, because you have to experience all of these things, and you have to learn the format, because um, a lot of the times people write their first book and expect it to be the best work that
yeah,
they've ever done, and everybody should love it, everybody should appreciate the fact that I wrote a book. But okay, it's great job, you did a wonderful job, you wrote a book, but at the same time, what's in the book? And
mm,
that is important. And with any other profession or any other career, you wouldn't expect somebody's first try to be a masterpiece. So why is that with a book? No
mm.
one has ever taught you this. So this was your first attempt. This is the first pancake. You have to keep going, and you have to,
Going.
yeah, just without putting
So
a bunch of pressure on yourself.
yeah, so wonderful. So, as a writer, has there been a change in your process of writing from when you wrote your first book, which was Love at the Rate of Facebook, and to the new book? What do you see when you look in the mirror? Has there been, what has been your growth or evolution that you yourself can probably validate?
I think a lot has changed since then. Back then, I had nothing to lose, because I definitely didn't set out thinking I was going to build a career out of it. I
Yeah,
was just writing a story that I was reading a lot, and I thought that I had this one story that I wanted to write. So then I wrote it. And then it fortunately did really well. So then I wrote another one. And so I was doing it on the side for fun, but also it was my main and only source of income. So it was great that the books were doing well. Um,
mm,
but then I think I got to a point when I was 22 and I had 6 books, that I realized that this can't be it. Like I I don't know everything, and I want to learn, and I want to not, box myself into this uh, so early, and I want to do other things, and I want to travel, and I want to meet new people and learn about writing, so that applied for a master's in fine arts, and then I moved to New York for that, and then I went to school. And um, I think there they don't teach you how to write because it's a master's program, so
Yeah.
they won't teach you the basics. But they do have these seminars where you read the same book as everybody else that week, and then every week we have the seminar where for 2 or 3 hours, whatever the duration of the class was, we talk about that book. And then that's when I learned how to be a good reader and
Mm.
notice things that I wouldn't normally notice, and then other people were pointing that out, and I realized, okay, this is what the book is about for this person. And
Yeah.
so once you become a good reader, I think that brings you closer to becoming a better writer, because it is about empathy, it is about observation, it is about um, just understanding that not every brain works like yours, so people will get different things out of it. So I think that's when the biggest shift happened in my writing. I kind of slowed down. I limited myself to one book a year because um, that felt more my pace at the
Mm.
time. And then last year was the first time that I didn't publish a book because I was working on this one, and I needed time, and I thought that it was fine to do that. And I always say that my books in the 2010s would be very different from my books in the 2020s, because that was a decade of my life, my first decade as a writer, and I did 12 books and some short story collections and some books under a pen name. So 15 or 16, whatever.
Mm.
That's my 20s. And now I just turned 30 last week.
Oh,
So this is going to be different. And in an exciting way. But then when people ask me if I would go back and change anything in my old books, I wouldn't, because that was how a 19-year-old thought. That was
mm.
how a 22-year-old thought. And that I can never get back. That's a time capsule for me.
Yeah.
So it's just a journey. It's all these steps. And I was never aiming for something. I still am not aiming for something. I just take it one book at a time, and I want to make it the best book that I can. And I think it took a long time to get there, because when I was younger and I had all these voices in my ear, because when you're a young girl, people will not take you seriously. People will always come and tell you, don't do that, don't write about that. Why don't you do this? Why don't you
Yeah.
do that? And you kind of like, in your subconscious mind, that kind of just absorbs much faster.
Mm.
So my writing kind of changed in the middle, and then I came back to being, let me write what I want to write, and then hopefully it will find readers that are like-minded or would want to read this. So it's been a long journey. It's been 10 years.
Yeah. But first of all, I think we should stop here for a second and wish you a belated happy birthday.
Thank you.
The milestone that you've reached. And I don't think people stop telling you how to write, what to write, and what not to write, even though you might go into your 40s as we
But
are.
we were just joking about this yesterday. I was with my friends, and I was saying, they were asking, does anything feel different? And I was like, yeah, because when I was younger, when I was 19, most my readers were older than me. And then
Yeah.
slowly that has shifted, because my readership is like college students and like young, like 25, 30 years
I
old,
get that. Yeah.
under 30,
Yeah.
mostly up to 35. But then I could
Mm.
just be like, respect your elders. Now that I'm older, we're like, don't talk back to
Don't
me.
say that. Yeah. Wonderful.
Um,
Oh, I'm so
but it
glad you.
starts to matter less
Yeah.
what other people are saying
Yeah. You
with
can
age.
actually just, kind of shut off and think this is white noise and I don't really need to. Yes,
Yeah.
but then people never stop. So you already got that experience. So let's end this session with what's your favorite quote or song?
In my book, there's this one pull quote that we took from my there's an author's note to begin with, and at the end I did this epilogue. It's called Mirror Mirror. And
Yeah.
in that, because with the novel you always get to tie loose ends and sort of zoom out from somebody's life and go back into it 6 months later, a year later, or something.
Yeah.
So I wanted that for this book, but it's a collection of stories, and you really, at the end of a story, don't want to force feed people, this is how you should think.
Yeah.
So I wanted it to be at the very end, people can read it or not. that tied loose ends together. That was really fun to write. And I think there I did this whole thing about um, in the end, in the mirror, this person sees this at the end of the day, and so then it comes down to like mine, because the last story is about me. And then I said at the very end, I say, when I look in the mirror, I see a person who dreams. And I think that has been a struggle for the past couple of years, especially with COVID and being kind of stranded in a new country alone. I just moved to Montreal a few months before COVID happened, and I was alone for a long time. And then all the stuff that you've been running away from kind of comes back and all that stuff. So I think dreaming still and not forgetting that uh, it's so easy to just do your job every day, watch TV, eat food, go to sleep, and then do it again till you die, basically over and over again. So it's very easy to get into that comfort. And but for me, dreaming can become a nightmare, because when you think about um, if there are dreams and no actions, then they can turn on you. And so that kind of reminds me to keep working towards what I want, and it will be uncomfortable, and not be afraid of, taking risks and all that stuff. And that's how I feel about love also, because I remember interviewing a couple for my job one time, and they just seemed like they didn't like each other, and they were maybe 70 at that point. And I turned to my friend and I said, well, why do people get married if they don't like each other? And then he said that I think it's because they stopped doing fun things. So while you're courting, while you're like dating, whatever, getting married and all that stuff, there's still activity, there's also fun, all these different things you're doing. But then get complacent, and then you live the same day over and over again till you die. So it's important to dream still, and it's important to not let that turn into a nightmare. So that's just a long way of saying that that's the emotion that I have been feeling the most recently, the past couple of years. That's been at the surface for me, that
Okay.
if I want to go somewhere, I have to take myself there. I can't just sit here and dream and have no action.
Yeah.
So
Wonderful. That was a very nice way of putting it. And the truth of it is that love and romance is something that cannot stagnate. It should not stagnate. It has to evolve, or at least it has to move to be viable. And it's like a heartbeat on the monitor. It will dip and rise, and that is how you know that it is alive. So when two people remain the same, how can, they don't remain the same. They grow and they evolve and they change. And then how can love and romance remain the same? So
right.
it was great talking to you, Nikita. I'm so glad that I got this opportunity. Thank you so much, Times Lit Fest, for giving us this platform. And I wish you a great evening ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was a wonderful conversation. And thank you, Times Lit Fest. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for watching today's sessions. Please join us tomorrow between 5 to 7 p.m. to watch our upcoming sessions. We will start a session with author and columnist Chetan Bhagat, who will be talking about his latest book, 400 Days, with Nandini Sen Mehra, winner of the Ruel International Poetry Prize 2020 for Best Upcoming Poet. Next, we will be in an explosive session with Siddharth Malia, who will be talking about his book, If I'm Honest, with author and journalist Jyotsna Mohan. Lastly, author and pediatrician Nadia Hashimi will be in conversation with Swati Daftor, Senior Commissioning Editor for Popular Fiction at HarperCollins India. Also, don't forget to talk about us on your social media handles by using the hashtag TimesLitFest.